That means we're ready. Good evening and welcome to tonight's listening session. We have a total of 3 people who have signed up to speak this evening. Each speaker will be given a total of 15 minutes. This 15 minutes includes the time for speakers' comments and dialogue and response from administrators and/or board members. While comments and questions on issues are welcome, law prohibits the board from discussing concerns about individual employees or students in public meetings. Please forward comments regarding individuals to the superintendent. If additional conversation follow-up is necessary, the superintendent will direct a staff member to contact you.
First speaker is Sarah Stillwater. And since she's not here, our first speaker will be Jennifer Henry.
Here. Sure. My name's Jennifer Henry. I live in Marine. My children are recent graduates of Stillwater schools. One is in the workforce and one is in college. They attended Marine Elementary. Why did they attend Marine? Simply because we moved there. I moved there to be closer to my parents during a difficult time in their lives. If you ask my children their viewpoints of Marine, you'd get very mixed reviews. One hated it, one loved it, one begged me to move, one even begged me to homeschool, which she hated me at the time, so that was really wild. If you ask my viewpoint, I think it's a pretty good school, a really good school with some really top-shelf teachers. Some challenges socially. If you're a kid who is on the outside, it's difficult. But at the end of the day, for a family like mine, location, location, location. I've read and listened to hours of testimony about specific strengths of Marine, Withrow, and Oak Park Heights. I'm sure they're all true. I've also read about Spanish immersion, needs for better district offices, needs for less traveling by specialists. I agree with it all. I appreciate that removing schools will hurt the social and economic landscape of the 3 communities, absolutely. I think it's a valid discussion of what happens if there's a charter school in Marine and then some development explodes, causing overcrowding at the schools that accepted all the displaced children. When my kids were in elementary school, had Marine been designated a school desert, as Bold would have it, my kids' school life would have been much compromised. I estimate probably 20% less support from me at home, probably 20% more missed school. I'm sorry, but an hour-long school bus for somebody like me to manage, there's going to be more missed school buses. I'm sorry, that's the facts. I'm not proud of it. I parented separately due to divorce. I was a frequent caregiver to my mother, who also lived in Marine. As a retail division head, I work a lot of hours, but certainly would not make enough to hire the services needed to get to my kids to and from the fun activities they'd like to participate in after school. Meaning I need a lot of plan Bs, and I did then. I still think parents do. I don't think I'm unique. I know I'm not unique. I think many of us are in a sandwich obligation-wise, and we're not apologizing, and we're not changing. So if I'm going to wave a flag of equity, which I love the idea of equity, especially in a neighborhood, in a district where there's a lot of disparity, proximity needs to be on that flag. But my kids are beyond elementary, so I speak today as a citizen and a voter. I realize that the district is going to do what it has to do, but I recently heard a radio segment and I was struck. It was, and I don't know if it was NPR, if it was some podcast, I really don't remember. But there was a representative, I think from the MSBA, was guiding some would-be candidates for school board. I later wanted to find the article or podcast. I couldn't find it. But I did find this, which must be on everybody's school board because it's by the MSBA. And, it says a body of what is a school board? And it's a body of locally elected individuals who represent the communities they serve. I don't feel represented. I know you two are board members, but I really don't feel represented. and I know I'm not alone. I talk with a lot of my neighbors. I speak with people of different demographics, whether they're raising kids, whether, they're senior citizens, they don't feel represented. I mean, you folks put out a survey. It seems like there's a lot of evidence that we're not being represented. The important task is to hire, direct, and evaluate the superintendent. Unless I'm wrong, BOLD was a directive by Denise Pontrelli. And I feel, whether it's right or wrong, I feel like this may be a bit backwards of how the board is working with that directive. It goes on to fund stuff like who should run, why you want to run. Are you concerned about more than a single issue? And this is hard for me to articulate, but I feel like at this point, even though there's a lot of good stuff in it, and some things that people just absolutely do not agree with, I feel like BOLD is now a single issue, and the more everybody digs their heels into supporting BOLD and making sure it moves forward, it's now a single issue and getting in the way of all the other things that we need to accomplish as a district. Are you interested in solving problems? Again, I think the more we dig our heels into BOLD, it's taking away from the other problems we need to solve. Do you want to be a member of a team? I'm sorry, but frankly, from what little I've seen, and I know I'm only getting a sliver of a representation, if your goals, if the way you represent the community that elected you is different from others, you're being completely excluded and somewhat villainized, and I'm not proud of that as part of our district. Frankly, I thought I was done there, and then I realized that my printer just ran out of paper, so there's a whole lot more that, thankfully, to you, I'm not going to address. But what qualities make a good school board member? Believers in a democratic process, able to function as a team member. These are all things that I think are just good reminders as we're facing an election year. I do have a couple questions, and forgive me, I've tried to keep up. Maybe they're valid, maybe they've already been addressed. Mike was kind enough to contact me when I asked the question about consolidating districts, because I come from retail, so consolidation is a common term. It sounds like it's very difficult because of fiduciary allocations. Is that the case? Is that what would prevent the two districts from merging?
I don't know that it would prevent. It's complex, so there's a lot to look at, and there's, when you consolidate, there's a winner and a loser for those districts who are consolidating. It might be a lesser of a tax base for one, but more of an increased cost for another, so there's just lots of layers to it.
And I suppose by the time you got to the end of it,
it'd be a lengthy process.
okay.
Lengthy is more than a couple of years
Okay.
process.
Okay. And then my second question, could districts be redrawn so that Marine could perhaps join? I realize there's a group of wonderful people forming a charter school. But is it possible for, if somebody's just not jiving with the charter school, that they could go to Scandia? Or that they wouldn't have to jump through hoops to do so?
The district boundarying, we've had lots of conversations about that statewide, not just here in Stillwater.
Okay.
Again, a lot of people, government lot levels higher than us to be able to do that work. But the open enrollment is a and there are, I guess, hoops that you have to jump through, but right now, Scandia Elementary is not, anybody can call and check. They are
Really?
at capacity,
Okay.
so they are accepting Forest Lake accepts people, yeah.
Okay. That's all the questions I have. I do want to thank you for your time. I know I ask hard questions. I know you've all been asked a lot of very difficult questions, but I also realize that you put an immense amount of time, and I do realize you're looking for the better of the whole. I do appreciate that, so.
Can I just answer one thing, clarify, I think? You made the comment that we get a directive from the superintendent related to the BOLD. I think a better word would be a recommendation, and the board's responsibility then is to accept, reject, or modify. But the superintendent really can't give us a directive to do that. He or she can give a recommendation, here's what I think you should do. And I don't know if that's just a fine line with that word, but it's not, here's what you must do, it's here's what I'm suggesting you do, and then as 7 board members, we decide what to do with that recommendation.
That makes sense. I think perception falls into there. I think there's some confusion.
Okay.
When you're trying, a lot of us, I should only speak for myself, I'm not used to paying this close of attention. So I'm probably not accustomed to, and I probably miss a lot. So what looks to me like something that's being presented is, and again, like I said, I've never looked at anything like this before. It somewhat appears like maybe we have the order reversed, but I understand what you're saying.
Jennifer, if I could just comment on a couple of things too, that you had shared. The presentation that you shared is one that we, the school board members asked MSBA to come and share with our prospective school
Okay.
board members. So that was something that we did about a week ago.
Maybe that's where I saw
Yep,
it.
so you
Okay.
maybe you did. So that's the standard MSBA and what the school board role is, trying to share that and have people have some conversation about what that might look like. I appreciate you sharing about the opportunities to have options, because as a single mom raising kids, or just any of us right now, if you have a couple of people even who are working full-time, trying to have opportunities for your kids and figure out how to do that is a challenge. And I appreciate you sharing that, because as we move forward, I think that's something that we need to try to figure out, how do we help families do that. The other piece about the BOLD, I agree with you that it seems like it's become a single issue. Even the BOLD, building opportunities to learn and discover, I feel like we've really lost that in our conversation. It's more about the school closures, which we know is really tough. But what we want to focus on is those things that we can do for kids. And, I actually went back this morning to take a peek, because I met with Ben Davis, our transportation coordinator. And I know the transportation is tough for people if you've been close 5 minutes away or 10 minutes away from your school. But the average for our kids, we looked at Marine, Anderson, Afton, Rutherford. The shuttle from Stonebridge to Marine is about 40 minutes long right now. We have kids going north. We have the same kind of thing. Rutherford is 43 minutes. We have some buses going to Withrow with 10 kids on it for 40 minutes. So the transportation thing is a real issue that we want to try work with and give families more options for what that looks like. So I appreciate you sharing that, and we'll make sure to look at that and try to address it.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Did I see Sarah Stibland come in? You're up, Sarah.
Hi. So I just have a couple of things. I just recently read this book over the summer called A Better Way to Budget. And it is by Nathan Levinson. And Nathan Levinson is the president of the company called District Management Council. And the District Management Council is, as I understand it, an organization that we have contracts with for consulting. And so I just was kind of curious to know, where he was coming from, what kind of a strategies does he propose. So I wanted to read the book. I'm a little bit disappointed in the book. I think it comes across as being very negative and condescending. And as an example, I just want to read a little bit of it. He says, the desire to fund a new reading program, a great goal, by cutting home economics or very small classes or tutors, for example, can feel like a morally righteous effort. And it's easy to dismiss those opposed as just recalcitrant, status quo loving union members putting the needs of adults before kids. And then he goes on to say, very often the source of resistance to change isn't a lack of caring for kids or putting the needs of the organization ahead of students, but rather sincere, heartfelt differences in beliefs. And then he goes on to say, in this chapter, we will dig deeper into how to align beliefs, create a shared vision, and win support for bolder budgets. So the thing is, what he goes on to do is not really, in my opinion, creating bolder budgets. He basically spends the entire chapter talking about how to get people to buy into what you want to do. And it's all about cutting. And I get it. In this day and age, that's what a lot of schools have had to do. Cut a lot of money out of budgets because that's just the nature of our economics. But he doesn't ever talk about what I think is a bold budget, which would be building partnership with local companies, gaining the support of the community for sharing different services. He doesn't ever talk about, in the entire book, engaging parents as volunteers for filling in positions and things that you need in a school to keep it running smoothly. His whole focus is on showing how the superintendent can spend the community's money on initiatives for the community's children without giving the community the respect and partnership they deserve. That's my opinion. I believe that there is a tremendous value in creating community trust and collaboration. When parents and communities are valued and connected in meaningful ways to the schools, great things happen. And this is much more valuable than money, but when it does happen, money often flows. It follows that kind of synergy. So my questions for you today are, does our district have a contract for consulting from this district management council at this time? Are we partnering in some way, getting advice from this person who wrote this book, which is, I think, quite negative and hurtful? If so, how long have we had that contract? How much have we spent? What kind of advice have they given us? What kind of plans, if we have a partnership with them in some way, what are they advising us to do? How much money has been spent already on consulting fees with the District Management Council? And the CEO of the District Management Council, who works with this, Nathan Levinson, is a Harvard professor who teaches a class called Entrepreneurship and Education Reform. And this suggests to me that he is trying to find ways to make money from our public institutions. And this organization, from what I can tell, relies heavily on technological assessment and tracking solutions, which are very, very expensive. I believe that that is not the right way to go, and I hope that that is not what is planned for our district.
I can maybe start. When Brenda Casilius was the superintendent at EMID, she brought DMC to EMID initially. Did surveys, did interests with superintendents and board members. I would guess maybe 6 years ago. I don't know how long she's been the commissioner, but
DMC's only been in existence since 2004, so at least I know that.
Yeah, I would say 6 would be my guess, but the timeline was she was only at EMID for 6 months because then Governor Dayton called her and said, would you be the commissioner? So I know it was during that 6-month period that she brought DMC in. John Tyne, who's now the interim over at St. Paul, was at Roseville at the time. He came over as the interim and continued the work with DMC.
Okay.
Each year since then, whoever the superintendent has been, and we've gone through a number over there, has continued to re-up with DMC, including Gene Lupke, who is currently the executive director.
But you're talking about EMID. You're not talking about our district.
Well, but it's a lead-in to what I'm sure Denise is going to tell you about how the funding goes with DMC.
Okay.
Because each district who was a member of EMID was part of the collaborative and was able to get reduced funding from DMC because we weren't all acting as individuals. We were acting as a collaborative.
Okay.
And so the funds that were expended from EMID the benefits came to each of the individual districts that are in EMID. And I believe even 916 became a piece of that. You might have the history on that.
I don't have the exact amounts.
Okay.
But I think the way some of this works, because some of the schools that are in EMID may or may not be also members of 916. 916
Right.
has 14 members.
We have 10.
Has 10. So, for example, if they get an individual contract with a school district, EMID or and/or 916 may pick up an additional part of that cost, so they're not being charged twice. Plus, I think there's probably a local cost, but I'll put that
Okay.
in.
Right, and do you want to speak to the summit and all that kind of
Yeah,
stuff?
sure.
But I can't tell you the amounts, I don't know those.
Sir, you are exactly right. I mean, the part of the district management council, and I believe why so many districts metro-wide are working with them, is because of budget cuts. This past, I was just with Tom Melcher, working on what the budgets are looking like coming forward, and just to remain status quo where we are, we'll need to look at about 2.4% increase each year, which won't be happening next year. And so districts are in that cycle of trying to figure out how to use their money differently. And that really is what the District Management Council helps people to do. You know, I can't respond to your opinion that it's negative, and from what I've worked with Nate and others, they're highly respectful of educators and communities. They also know that some of these changes are really difficult to make. An example of that is if you're looking at results for kids, which is what we have to do, right? Look at our results. For many of our students who are struggling, most of our kids who are in special education or who are in that category of needing extra support, it's usually in the area of reading.
Okay.
Instead of hiring reading specialists, what has happened in the past is many school districts, as soon as their kids are starting to struggle, they recommend them for special education services. Many of our special educators, not all, but they have not had as much reading instruction as a reading specialist. So he advocates for looking at, you know what, do we really need more special education teachers, or should we be looking at reading specialists for our kids? Those kind of things, really looking at what your system is. The other piece they look at is how to reallocate, and I would say instead of cutting, it's really how to reallocate. How do we take some of the money maybe that we're spending on special education, put it into reading specialists? How do we look at giving kids grade level material with extra support rather than doing the same thing over and over? So there's lots of strategies, but they're all focused on really helping kids achieve better results. And the other thing I think I should mention, the partnership and looking at the dollars, I'm hesitant now to say exactly what they are, but we've broken it down and we can respond to that. They have a partnership with EMID, and through EMID that pays for, part of the partnership is bringing teams of people together, not just the superintendent. I can't do this work. It's got to be our teams. And what they do is, yes, there is a cost, and some of it is the technology piece. What you have to look at is we don't have a person within that does research, data analysis, or the software to do it at the district level that we keep. You do contract out with them. And when you look at our contracts and consultants, it looks like it's very high. In reality, when you break that down and look at it, most of our consultation within the district is for environmental, safety, boilers, all those kind of things. That portion that's really on education that we would spend with EMID, 916, DMC, is probably less than 100,000 compared to $1 million. So there are costs, but from my perspective.
Is that in a given year, within one budget? Like 100,000 within a given year? Or?
No,
about
probably
over what period of time?
Yeah, probably more like 50 or 60 probably per year. Some
Okay.
of them are 2-year projects, and you can sign up for extra projects to be part of them or not, depending on where your district is.
Okay.
And then the other thing is with their recommendations, they always preface it with, if you don't save as much as our consultation costs you within the district, that they'll refund that money for you.
Okay.
So if you don't gain that, now, you know, there's lots of conversation because some of the things that we talk about are difficult decisions, and they might be easy to recommend but hard to follow through with. And some of it is just trying to look at things we've done over many, many years and saying, is that still the best thing to serve kids?
So we don't, as a district, we don't have a direct contract with this DMC for consulting services, but we do through the EMID organization. Is that correct?
You have the membership piece. Like Georgia mentioned, that it would be cost prohibitive for us to do it singly, so it's in a partnership, and then they give us services through that. And then additionally, you can add on a project for something. Like last year, we looked at the whole strategic use of resources and data analysis, trying to look at our class size and what classes were we offering that weren't being actually, that we ended up not staffing because of a bunch of kids. It's looking at all kinds of different variables that we don't have the software to be able to do.
Okay.
Yeah, if I may, a little bit, and I'm probably a little bit more knowledgeable than I would if you asked me this 2 weeks ago, because Connie Hayes, as superintendent at 916, went through this. The way I take DMC is what they study is how to get the most bang for the buck. Or they raise the question, is this particular program and the way you're doing it effective for the dollars that you spend? So you can, I think, as an individual district, say, we want to study what are our programs. Say it's special ed. So you hire them, and you may get support from EMED and 916, plus locally, this is what you're going to spend. And then they'll do the study, and as Denise said, they'll come back with recommendations. But districts can or cannot buy into those recommendations. They make the final choice.
Sure.
But I think your point is well raised, and I read that same book that you have there, is sometimes that's how to do it from an economic point of view.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes where it gets more difficult or challenging at the local level, is that the end all? Or do you have other competing ideas
Right.
that you balance off?
Well, I think we saw the end. Tom Nelson had us do a special ed study and looked at the AROI, I'm sure is the phrase in there. And then he brought to the board recommendations for cutting in special education. But if you're cutting there, that's, in his mind, was saving money somewhere else where you don't have to cut, or you
Right.
can invest money elsewhere. So he did the study. We purchased that one. I think this year South St. Paul purchased that same one. So districts will purchase those specific things because they want to take a look at specific programs. If you remember the board meetings last year, we had special ed teachers and nurses and so on who came and said, well, why are you doing this? Well, it was probably based on
The
study,
recommendation
that special.
Yeah.
from the
ed-
study.
Right.
But Sarah, to go back to an earlier question, and I think you can't do that from memory offhand, or at least I
Yeah.
can't, and I don't expect that Bob
Yeah, exactly.
or Denise can as well. But if you wanted to go back 2-3 years and see what was spent on a request for a particular study like special ed, they can probably break that out for you, and they can break it out, how much was spent locally, how much was subsidized by 916, and how much by EMED, and you get a total cost.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our third speaker, Carl Blondin. Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening. I understand that because of confidentiality, you cannot discuss pending litigation. Want to comment on a few things. First, I want to compliment your attorney, Peter Michael. I was at the June 24th motion hearing. He's very professional. He's very well prepared. The district more than got its money's worth. I read his memorandum of law. It was exceptionally well organized. The writing was polished. He cited all the appropriate law. We never know how a judge will rule on things. However, I don't think he could have asked for an attorney to do a better job. I think the district's money was well spent. It was an excellent choice as an attorney. Of course, there are two other lawsuits going. One is the petition for writ of certiorari to the Court of Appeals, which I'm not going to address. It is a proper form of litigation if someone has a difference with the district and is allowing people their due process rights. My concern is with the other lawsuit, 834 Voice versus Independent School District 834, Washington County District Court case number 82 CV 16 1542. When I spoke to you a couple of months ago, I addressed the issue of pursuing sanctions against Mr. Cardle's law firm for his lawsuit, and I think there are reasons to pursue them against Mr. Knock and his law firm in this lawsuit. The lawsuit has 5 accounts. It's essentially 5 lawsuits. Count 1 is entitled Illegal School Closures. Well, there's a problem with this count. The legislature has given the Court of Appeals exclusive jurisdiction over the issue of closing schools. It's improper to bring that type of lawsuit in district court. Mr. Knock should know that because he brought the petition for writ of certiorari. He should understand that the Court of Appeals has exclusive jurisdiction. Because of that, I believe that that particular count is frivolous, vexatious, has no basis in law, and is imposing costs upon this district that this district should not bear, namely the cost of defending against that count. And as a taxpayer, I would urge the board and the administration to discuss the issue of sanctions against the plaintiff's attorney and his law firm for bringing that count. The second count, violation of open meeting law, at this time all I can say is I think it's poorly pled, it's vague, it does not put the defendants on notice as to exactly what they're defending against. I would expect that most judges would order Mr. Knock to amend that and come back and then look to see if it's sufficient. And I'd urge you to bring that issue up with your attorneys. Count 3 was entitled violation of a bond statute. For the reasons I gave a couple of months ago when I discussed the lawsuit of Douglas versus Independent School District 834 on the petition for writ of mandamus, I think that is frivolous and vexatious. It's subjecting the district to attorney's fees that it shouldn't have to simply because this is a politically motivated piece of litigation, not actually based in the law. Count 4 is entitled violation of election law. There have been no criminal convictions. There have been no criminal charges. I honestly believe that the way it's pled, it appears to be frivolous and vexatious, and in my opinion, would subject an attorney to sanctions. I think count 5 is the worst, entitled conflict of interest, where allegations are made against a board member and an employee. I'm not going to say who they are because, in my opinion, those statements are defamatory per se. They are protected because they are in a pleading, and anything in a legal pleading or testimony in court is absolutely protected. But if I were to repeat the names of those people, I believe I would be subject to a lawsuit, so I'm not going to mention the names. There appears to be no factual allegation that would support a cause of action for this. Additionally, the plaintiff's attorney has failed to what's called join necessary parties. The employers of this particular board member and the employee have received money. They have a property interest. You cannot get a judgment against someone for money against them unless they are a party to a lawsuit. This is a very basic matter. It's something that any attorney should know to do, and it would appear the only reason it was done is plaintiff's counsel is afraid of the attorneys that those employers would hire, because I believe those attorneys would be successful getting the counts dismissed and obtaining sanctions against a plaintiff's attorney. It is a pointless cause of action because the court cannot order a judgment against entities that are not parties. And I urge you to discuss that with your attorneys. I think it may be possible to recover money to cover some of the legal fees, which I think is important in the interests of the taxpayers of this district. You've certainly invested wisely in the law firm you've retained, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that being the third speaker, I think the listening session is over. Thank you.